something that we've talked about a lot. And actually, you came to us and you taught us about it, was short-term rental and mid-term rentals. And it was impressive because as we took what you said, we really saw the transformation in what short-term rental and mid-term rental can be to people. Now, when did you get into mid-term rentals or short-term rentals?
Yeah, about 3 years ago.
So you saw it during COVID.
Yeah.
When the high of when everybody was renting short-term or mid-term rentals. Why did you go from long-term rentals and decide, okay, all of a sudden, I want to get into this mid-term section?
Yeah, so to start, I didn't know anybody that did like the Airbnb short-term model. Obviously, I could log into Airbnb and see that there were lots of people doing it. I just didn't know them. So I didn't have any mentors. I didn't have people to teach me the right or the wrong ways. I literally only had experience doing long-term and like government subsidized, rentals prior to that point. All that went through my mind was, I wonder if, so we had a tenant move out of a property. So my mind was asking me, what's the highest and best use of this property? Because up until this point, it's just been throwing a tenant in there for a year minimum at a time. And I just asked the question, is there something else that this box could be producing differently, better than what it's currently doing? And I just started thinking, well, how many days do I need to rent to get the net result of what would have been 1 month's rent? And it ended up not being very many days. And then I thought, okay, so that's worst case scenario if I'm being conservative, maybe not worst, but a conservative scenario. Best case scenario is exponentially greater. This black box that I call a home will produce so much more money if that scenario works out. Once again, I didn't know of anybody to talk to verify probabilities versus possibilities. And so I just thought, I've got nothing to lose. Like, I've got these other rentals anyway. This is our only vacant one. We'll just try it with this one. And I rented it within a week. And the person that I rented it to, because it ended up being kind of in the months that we're in right now, closer to October, ended up being a winter visitor from Canada. And so I asked him, I just said, hey, thank you for booking, blah, 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 blah. And looking forward to having you. And just out of curiosity, how did you find us? Knowing that it was through VRBO, that was the website that he used. He's like, oh, just, you were the only one that popped up, Jason. And I said, that's interesting. Because in my mind, I'm like, I can think of 20 that should have popped up. And I said, what criteria did you input into VRBO to have made mine the only one that came up? He's like, well, I only really put in a couple. Number one, I want to rent for 6 months. So that was a big thing that wedged out the majority of them. But then the second criteria that he input was, he says, I also believe that you get what you pay for. And I would never rent somewhere under $300 a night. And that right then, I saw that there's a demographic dichotomy or disparity, I should say, between what some Arizona residents view as a snowbird or winter visitor that's staying in a trailer park, nothing wrong with that, versus maybe the winter visitor that was formerly a CEO or something, right, where they lived a different lifestyle. They would not perhaps want to live in the trailer park during their retirement years when they've got hundreds of millions of dollars sitting in an account. They would want something different, right? And they have their own criteria that tells them good, better, best. And for this person, it's got to be at least $300 a night or there's going to be problems with it. And I would never do that. That was demographic number one, the winter visitor. Demographic number two ended up being, that I learned later from the same rental, it happens frequently that people have a home flood or catch fire or any type of, natural disaster that might take place that affects the home. The insurance, the hazard insurance that they have on the property typically says something along the lines of, if this were to happen, you have purchased insurance where we have to put you in a like for like scenario. So if you live in a 4,000 square foot house, that burns down, we have to find you a 4,000 square foot house until your other home has been built, right? The problem is that supply doesn't really exist. There aren't enough people that happen to have a 4,000 square foot home that they can move into. So in most cases, the insurance company has to put them in numerous hotel rooms if they're like a family, or whatever. And so I thought to myself, if I were an insurance company, because that's what they look at as cost, from a cost perspective, am I a burden or a blessing to them? And so I started asking, hey, what do you typically pay for a family of 6 if their house burns down and they're in a 3 or 4 bedroom home to put them in a hotel? They're like, well, our negotiated rates are typically some number between $150 and $250 in this area that you're talking about of Mesa, right? And I said, okay, so $150, let's assume that they've got the least expensive, times 2 rooms or 3 rooms. So if it's 2 rooms, it's $300. If it's 3 rooms, that's at least $450, right? So if it's $450, so as long as my pricing is $300, I'm saving the insurance company $150, which is a win for the insurance company. But to the client, right, they're getting a huge upgrade, because instead of being in a hotel room with no kitchen, no garage, separated, dealing with neighbors all over the place that are changing every day because it's a hotel, they get an actual house, right? Whether it has a pool, hot tub, community, whatever, it's their own private place. It's like what they came from. It's more like for like. Then it's a win for the customer and a win for me, because compared to my competitor at $70 a month, I'm getting $300 plus, depending upon, whatever. That was the second demographic that I saw. And I learned through my first rental that I lived in an HOA that I didn't check into would not even allow short-term rental, which by definition is anything less than 30 days. So after receiving the first fine from the HOA, right, saying you cannot do this, it wasn't even an option for me to do the normal Airbnb and VRBO model. That was my very first one. So I had to learn how to create a process that would only cater to and accommodate these other 2 categories of winter visitor when I say short-term, meaning not year-long, but midterm, or, midterm insurance company, clientele. The amount of money that I was charging insurance companies and winter visitors ended up being a higher monthly rate than what would have been the cumulative daily rate of what the normal Airbnb vacationer would pay, because I had to charge a little bit lower. And so I looked at it and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm doing what felt like 50x the work for less money. And I'm doing that much more damage to the property of turning through that many tenants and constantly having to change out than here. And so now every single one of our properties has a minimum of 30 days. Even if they're in an HOA, it doesn't matter, because I already know I'm good with a 2-month on average vacancy throughout the year. Now, it does require more work than just putting it on Airbnb.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a lot more going on behind how you're communicating with the insurance companies and staying on top of it. But that additional work that I'm doing with my time, the return on that time is exponentially greater than what would have been spending that same time managing 60-something tenants, cycling through that same home.